Hello, everyone. It is 6 p.m. I'm winding down, but I thought I would just get on here and do a really quick podcast or just a lesson. Okay, so last week for class one, we had a cohort of 10 people online, and we were going to continue the class until for 7 weeks. And the Peace Activations Foundation training that we are offering on Peacelab is really our first pilot of a 7 week course testing the peace activation methodology. Now, the peace activation methodology is a blend of peace building, spiritual psychology, somatic healing, and feminine leadership and wisdom, designed and founded by Eva Dalak. So last week for class one, we worked on a practice called the triad. And if you came to our Inner Peace to Clarity workshops that we had through Peace Lab, the 90 online workshops, then you are familiar with the triad practice that we all did together. And so for the first class, we also did the triad for the Peace Activation Foundations training. And one of the observations that I had for the first class was one of the biggest takeaways from when we did the triad practice. And the triad practice is when each person takes a role, and there's 3 roles. There's the speaker, the listener, and then the observer. And the biggest takeaway that I had was questions about being the observer. Because in the practice, you're working with 3 people. One person's speaking, another person's listening, and the third person is observing the interaction between the speaker and the listener. We all are supposed to embody these roles and practice throughout the 7 weeks. It seems very simple, but when you are going through the practice, you realize how uncomfortable it can be to be a speaker, and you have to speak or hold space for the allotted time. And then to be a listener is probably the easiest in my opinion, but the observer is quite interesting too, because you have to watch the listener and the speaker do their thing. And that's part of our training, is also to learn how to do what we call heart-centered communication. And part of this is also learning the skills to be more present and able to sit with your own emotions and then the emotions of other people, or what you see on your external reality. The concept of being an observer really stuck with me. When you are embodying the role of an observer, it not only means that you are watching the interactions of other people outside of you, but you're also observing your inner landscape, thinking about how we practice mindfulness and how we practice having more presence, and how we help ourselves to be less reactive when the world is chaotic on the outside or we're experiencing conflict with other people. And one of the things that we talked about last class was the fact that the biggest misconception about talking about inner peace and peace expansion, or how do you activate peace in your external reality. We have discussed it several times on Peace Lab, but I'll say it again here. When we're talking about inner peace and outer peace, we are never saying that conflict or tension does not exist. Conflict and tension exist. It's inevitable that these things are existing. So when we are thinking about tools for inner peace, we're thinking about ways that we can take care of our inner world and our inner tension the best way we can, and be self-accountable for our own triggers and our emotional well-being and psychological well-being. And then also how we can be accountable for how we show up in the world, and how do we navigate conflict and tension out there with other people or in our environment when we face challenges. So now that we know that tension and conflict are inevitable, and what we teach at Peace Lab and when we talk about inner peace work, we're saying that we understand that conflict and tension exists, and also that it's detrimental to our soul transformation and our personal growth. We need conflict and tension out in the world to learn more about ourselves and to have spiritual growth and a spiritual evolution. So it's really important. Now, going back to the concept of the observer, which was one of the biggest takeaways that I wanted to share with you today. So when we're talking about being an observer of our inner world, we are talking about how we can create a pause and space between us and the conflict on the outside or the tension on the outside. So when you are embodying the role of an observer, like you can practice every day and say, how do I become an observer of my reality? The biggest thing that we're talking about here is how do we not become reactive to our external environment? How do we stay in our center even when there's chaos on the outside or there's conflict on the outside or tension? Now, a few examples of observing your outside reality. I live in New York. It's super crazy all of the time, super crowded. Even today, I was like trying to navigate the subway system, and I have to continuously remember my practice of being mindful because I get caught up in the craziness and I get swept up and I become unconscious. I'm just like following the crowd of people. There's somebody yelling, there's music playing. It's so loud and chaotic and I feel super stressed out. And in that moment, I have to practice being the observer of my external environment. So what does that mean? It means that I have to come back to my breath and come back to mindfulness. Today I did that. I literally was navigating this subway system and I realized that I was overwhelmed and I just took a breath in and just paused in my tracks and was like, okay, everything that's going on right now, it's the chaos out there. It does not have to be the chaos in here. And we are so sensitive as human beings, and that's okay. But we also have the power to come back to our breath and recenter ourselves, even if the world outside is chaotic. I really do believe that if you're able to work on your mindfulness and your inner peace in places like New York City where it's super crowded and chaotic, then you can do it anywhere, right? We would like to have a really peaceful environment and be in nature, but it's actually in the chaos of the city where we can really learn these skills of mindfulness and how to be present. So what happened to me when I was in the subway is that when I was getting swept up by everything that was outside of me, all of the people, certain people screaming, there's music, there's different signs, I'm trying to navigate the subway system. How do I come back to the present? How do I come back to my inner peace and my mindfulness? It's really from pausing and becoming an observer of me and the external reality. So what I'm doing is that I'm creating a space between me and all of the chaos that is outside of me. That is really the key to conflict or tension. It's not that we are trying to eradicate conflict, eradicate tension on the outside. What we really are trying to do is create space between us being reactive and what's going on in our environment. That's one thing. And the way that you do this is to become an observer. What's going on inside of me? I'm overwhelmed. I want to escape New York. I hate New York. Everything sucks. Like, I'm running around. The city is too chaotic. It's too noisy. Can't I just like imagine myself on an island or in the Himalayas? Like your mind starts going in all of these negative ways of thinking, and it's really taking you off your center. And what we're trying to practice here is to come back into the body and come back to letting it go, because everything that's on the outside is just triggering the emotions inside of you. That's what we're trying to clean up here. We're trying to create space between us and the reactive response or the trigger that the outside world is creating for you, because nobody on the outside, no conflict, no environmental situation can take away your personal power. Obviously, what's going on in your external reality can be challenging. And if you're living in a situation where what you see in the environment and within society or in your neighborhood or in your city is really destructive to your psyche, we understand that. But what we're talking about here is always having personal power to come back to your inner peace. And being an observer between you and the environment on the outside is the first step to giving yourself power again for your inner peace. And now the second way to be an observer is if you are dealing with somebody and conflict has come up, or there's tension between you and the other. The same thing. If somebody is coming at you with an emotional response or a trigger, what you can do is, instead of getting sucked into their emotions and their projections, is to really take a breath, take a step back and observe the situation. Allow them to have their emotional response and their reaction and just observe. Don't think about your rebuttal statement. Don't think about all of the ways that they don't see you, they don't know you, they're not listening to you. Don't think about how wrong they are. Really just step back and observe them without judgment and without being condescending. And it's in that space of separation between you and the other that you are able to clean up the space energetically and mitigate the conflict or solve it in some way. Because what happens energetically is that when you are getting triggered by somebody else that's coming at you with an emotional reactive response, or they're saying things about you that are not true, they are attacking your character, or they are really frustrated about something and they're overwhelmed and they're projecting all of that on you. It is really easy for us to start to become defensive and wanting to fight back. And what we talked about in class on last Friday was that if you become an observer, what you do is you create space between you and the other. So even if they're having their emotional reaction and projecting things onto you, if you are observing, you're watching them. You're giving them the space to show up how they want to show up, to say what they want to say, but you're not getting defensive about it because you're observing. Now, if you were taking it all in and it's causing a response in your body, then that's what you need to work on and you need to address within your own inner conflict and your own tension, because what is happening is that they're stirring up something in you that needs to be cleaned up anyway. But what we really discussed about being the observer is that even if you don't really agree with the person that's coming at you, what you're developing is a skill set to be a deep listener and not be swayed by the external environment, not be swayed by another person. You're preventing yourself from adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. And what we really want to do here is remind ourselves that we have the power to fix our reaction. We have the power to respond without responding. When we allow another person to just show up the way that they want to show up, we are actually creating distance. We're creating space. We're protecting our energetic body from whatever is happening out there. And that's how we choose peace, right? We're not saying that what's happening outside of us is correct. We're not even saying that we agree with them. We're just allowing whatever that's happening outside of here not to take us off center. And so that's what the triad practice really instilled in me in class one, was where can I be an observer more often in my life, whether that is with my inner landscape, my own stress, my own overwhelm, and the environment outside of me, even if it's just like New York's chaotic craziness or the deadlines that I have or the responsibilities that I have, because that is the outside environment. Those things that are abstract or just not an actual person is still something that is causing an emotional reaction in me. And so the first step to not losing yourself to what's going on out there is to take a breath and bring yourself back to your body and say, I don't have to get swayed by what's happening out there. I actually do have power over my emotional response and how I'm going to handle this. But what happens is that we go unconscious, right? Somebody outside of us starts triggering us, or we're facing conflict or stress on the external environment, and we really lose ourselves because we lose our presence. We lose our mindfulness. Our brain starts going into a million different directions, overthinking, thinking about the worst case scenario. And what's really happening is that you're forgetting that you have to be an observer of your internal landscape. You have to be able to check in with yourself and saying, okay, this is causing an emotional response. It's causing myself to be reactive. How do I come back? How do I come back constantly? How do I come back to my body, come back to my breath? Because what's going on out there shouldn't be ruining what's going on in here. So if you are having conflict with somebody outside of you, or you're stressed out about something that's going on in your external reality, you can start practicing having mindfulness and awareness about how it's triggering you or taking you off balance, taking you off your center. Some of the questions that you can ask yourself in moments like this is, okay, How am I responding to this person? How is my body responding to this person right now? How am I being triggered by this person, by the situation? And then identifying what the issue actually is for you. And noticing if you have judgment, noticing if you, and judgment is thinking things like, wow, this person really sucks, or like, wow, I can't believe that they're getting mad at me for something that I didn't even do. Even if you are right, you still have some sort of judgment, most likely, about what's going on outside of you. And the reason why we need to start getting better at recognizing our own judgment to the outside world and other people is because it means on some level you're getting sucked in to that energy. And what we really want to start becoming better at is staying center, staying in our own power, being non-reactive. When we get to the point where we're so good at being non-reactive, this is when the magic truly happens, because all our personal development, all of our personal growth and transformation, and how we actually stay in the embodiment of inner peace comes from our ability to create distance between us and the conflict outside, or us and the tension outside. Okay. And it's twofold. It means being an observer of your internal landscape, understanding when you're triggered, when you are feeling upset, when something is happening inside of you because of another person outside, or because of the environment outside. It's keeping self-compassionate awareness of what's going on in you and allowing it to pass. Or journaling in the evening about that trigger that came up and understanding the root cause of it, understanding that it does not define you and it's not your identity and it's not the way that you have to be, and letting it go and coming back to your inner peace, coming back to your mindfulness, your peace. And it might sound a little bit abstract, and I'm really trying to not make it be, but for example, so this happened to me a few weeks ago. I went to FedEx and I was trying to print out a couple of badges with the FedEx guy. And I went in to pick up my order, and he was really emotional and he was frustrated, and he started to raise his voice at me because he was telling me that he was like, I have to close soon. I can't do this, and getting really worked up. And I was having a day as well. I was walking around New York, and so I was probably not as conscious as I should have been either. I was in a rush, and when he was getting mad, I almost got sucked in to his projection. And what I had to do was literally like stop myself from judging him, first of all, step back, take a deep breath, and just let him react. And I became an observer. I just allowed him to just emote, to express himself. And what happened, because I was not defensive, because I was not judging him, and because I was not condescending, I was just observing out of a place of compassion and curiosity, because I took a step back and I paused. When he was reacting and getting frustrated, he actually calmed down himself because I wasn't being combative back. I wasn't becoming defensive back. What happened was I created space between me and the other. I let him do his thing. I listened to him and I just observed him, because everything that he was going through, all of his stress, all of his overwhelm, all of his frustration, had nothing to do with me. It really didn't. And if I was triggered by him, it is showing me my own ways in which I am walking around unconscious, or I am affected by somebody else and my own defensiveness. And so this practice of observing what's going on in you and saying like, why am I triggered? What is coming up for me from this random stranger? And can I diffuse the situation internally and have a state of calm, even if my external environment is not calm? If the person outside of me is like having conflict with me. And as soon as I did that, because I was not fighting him back, because I was not defensive, he relaxed, he gathered himself together, and he actually gave me free prints later on. And he was so nice to me. That's a little conflict that happened outside. And obviously there are small conflict and there's bigger conflict. There's little trauma, there's big trauma. And depending on the environment and what's going on in your society and your community and what you're facing in your lived reality, the degree to which you are able to process things on the outside, it's going to vary. And we recognize the privilege of having just these small interactions and these small ways of dealing with conflict outside of us. But this is where you practice it. And we all are going to face little conflict, big conflict in our lives. You know, that was a FedEx guy that I had this interaction with, and I had the opportunity to clean up the space on the outside and clean up how I was going to handle my own emotions and my own reactivity within me, right? And he had a moment too, because after he was seen and after he had his emotions let out, he didn't feel like I was a threat. And why would I make him feel that I was a threat? You know, we're trying to diffuse the conflict between us and the other. Because the thing is, we don't need to take from these kind of situations. We don't need an opportunity to prove ourselves to another person. We don't need the opportunity to prove that we're good enough. We don't need the opportunity to prove that we are right. We don't need the opportunity to defend ourselves. That is coming from a wounded place within us if you are still taking from your external environment in that way. And so this is a very minor way that we are looking at conflict outside of us. The same thing applies if you're home with your family and your parents say something triggering, or you're fighting with your siblings, or you are with a colleague or a peer that you don't like and you don't resonate with. It's the same thing when they are showing up the way that they show up, and if they are projecting certain emotions or things onto you, you don't have to make it your reality. You don't have to participate in it. But what you can do is learn how to be an observer, curious and compassionate for what's going on internally, and curious and compassionate for what they are experiencing on the outside. Maybe it's like, why should we do that? Why do we have to accommodate for another person's experiences? Or why do we have to even, be involved with people who are acting this way? And this is just an example of the fact that we're not here to say that conflict does not exist and that the world is, always peaceful on the outside. Peace internally and externally does not mean that we are turning a blind eye to what is going on in the world, or we're turning a blind eye to conflict. It's how do you navigate and create space between you and the other, or you and the environment outside of you, so you don't get sucked into the noise. And this same practice applies to when you are stressed out about something happening with your business, something happening with your relationship, something happening, the move that you have, or whatever it is on the outside. We get so caught up in our external problems that we lose ourselves. We lose ourselves to the stress. We lose ourselves to the stories. We lose ourselves to the negative thinking. And this practice of being an observer of our internal landscape also applies to moments like this. How do I create space between me and what is going on outside of me? Inner peace starts with the observation of your internal world and how you're getting triggered and what are your shadows. And what your shadows are is your negative thinking and your programming that's keeping you small and stuck in fear and lack. Okay, that's what our responsibility is as human beings. It's to constantly create space internally from all those things that are not us, that are not our true essence, that are not our authentic selves, to create space in the mind so we're not getting sucked up by things that are not true and stories, and definitely not things on the outside of us. I don't want to make this too long, so I wanted to read a poem by Rumi because this guy is my favorite poet of all time. I just opened the book because I like to do that just to see what is the vibe. And the poem that I got on is Bismillah. I think it's a lesser known poem, so that's cool. Bismillah means in the name of God. Okay, so it's what Muslims say before every prayer, Bismillah, in the name of God. And then they list out the names of God. And this is what the Rumi poem is called, so let's read it. Okay, it's a habit of yours to walk slowly. You hold a grudge for years. With such heaviness, how can you be modest? With such attachments, do you expect to arrive anywhere? Be wide as the air to learn a secret. Right now, you're equal portions clay and water, thick mud. Abraham learned how the sun and moon and the stars all set. He said, "No longer will I try to assign partners for God. You are so weak. Give up to grace. The ocean takes care of each wave till it gets to shore. You need more help than you know. You're trying to live your life in open scaffolding. Say Bismillah in the name of God, as the priest does with a knife when he offers an animal. Bismillah, your old self, to find your real name." Wow. So I think this poem to me, especially in the beginning when it's like, it's a habit of yours to walk slowly, you hold a grudge for years. With such heaviness, how can you be modest? With such attachments, do you expect to arrive anywhere? And I think to me, it sounds like this lack of freedom, or to me, it sounds like how we are almost slave to our mind or slave to what is happening outside in the world. And it's talking about these attachments from these attachments, such as our worry, our fear, the conflict outside of us, the things that we can't control on the outside that we hold on to, and it traps us. And it doesn't allow us to be really free and present. And so when we're talking about God and what Rumi is talking about here is always to come back to consciousness, always come back to the present moment. Because in that is true liberation and in that is true freedom. And if you're holding on to things like a grudge for years or negative thinking for years, you're carrying this heaviness on you and you are limiting yourself from growth. You're limiting yourself from new opportunities and expansion because you cannot let yourself free. But it is a reminder that to find freedom is to come back to yourself. And here Rumi is talking about even Abraham, father of the monotheistic religions, right? Learned how the sun and the moon and the stars all set. He said, "No longer will I try to assign partners for God." So what is he talking about here? He's saying that the present moment is the only thing that exists. And all of creation is the only thing that exists. So when he's looking at the sun, the moon, and the stars and how they set, he's saying there's a design that is already in place. He's looking at everything in his external environment. These are good things that he's talking about, which are creation, the sun, the moon, the stars. But what he's referencing is that there's something that we don't have the power to control or to create. And when he's saying that I'm not going to assign partners to God, this is not talking about false, well, he's not talking about multiple gods here. He's talking about recognize where you're worshiping things outside of God. And that is the fear, that is the anxiety, that is the control, the things that you want to do to change your environment outside of you. But he's saying just looking at all of this creation, you realize that there's no power that you have to change the things on the outside because somebody else created them and they're just designed. And Rumi says, "You are weak, give up to grace." And what that means is that it's not up to us to carry all of the weight of the world on our shoulders. Giving up to grace means to surrender to what we see on the outside, to surrender to circumstances and challenges and things on the outside. The ocean takes care of the wave. You are going to be divinely guided. Things are going to work out. Things are going to change and you will get to shore. And it's easier said than done, especially like I said, if you are in a challenging situation or environment. But this reminds us that the real power is to come back to this moment of presence and mindfulness and to let go as much as you can of the heaviness of control and the heaviness of trying to escape the external reality. Because what we're really here to do is be self-accountable for our inner landscape. Because what we can we can't control anything that's happening on the outside. And we're not supposed to. Be okay with being weak in how Rumi defines it here. Because what it means is just surrender and humility. In his eyes, what he's talking about. It's surrender and humility to things outside of your control. And what that does is it creates more grace in you as a human being. It just creates more grace for you as a human being. And it's called Bismillah because it's saying in the name of God. All things are the way that they are. Everything that is outside of your control is by divine orchestration. We're not supposed to know and we're not supposed to be involved in those types of matters. But what we can do and what we have free will to is have self accountability, build, create, give, love, joy, face, listening ear to others. But we're not supposed to manipulate or influence the outside world. So that's all I have for being an observer. But thank you. And that was the takeaway from class one. Stay tuned because we will definitely be offering the 7-week course again. And thank you.